Hello, everybody. I want to warmly welcome all of our attendees. My name is Robert Gordon. I'm the president of the Chevy Chase Citizens Association, and I'm really thrilled to have this event coming off this evening. We've been planning this and thinking about it and working with Kathy to find an exact right date. We plan on having, it's being recorded now, and we plan on having it on our website. So if you miss any of it, please feel free to join us at chevychasecitizens.org. We have upcoming political forums for mayor, city council, and attorney general, and essentially all of the open seats. So please watch our website and our newsletter to look for that. But without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Shelley Cohen, who's CCCA's guru on the environment. And she's going to give a good introduction to Kathy. So I'm going to disappear, and I know that you'll enjoy this webinar. And I look forward to listening it because I have a big garden that I want to work on. So thank you for being here.
Well, good evening, everybody. I'm so thrilled to be here with Kathy Sykes to talk about gardening, to talk about beautifying our neighborhoods, our yards, and doing them in a natural way that not only helps the environment, but keeps things beautiful for years to come. Kathy has just this incredible resume of things that she's done, from working at the EPA to being a master gardener. She was trained right here at the University of the District of Columbia, to working to beautify our own community. She's responsible for a lot of the fauna that we see up and down the Chevy Chase, up and down the Connecticut Avenue corridor. And we're so grateful for you volunteering to do that, and for bringing the community and really creating a movement around beautifying these spaces, which we love so dearly. I don't want to take up too much time other than to say, we're so grateful that you're here with us tonight for the Chevy Chase Citizens Association. The presentation, this recording, will be available on our website, and any information that you have, I will also be sharing on our website as well. So without further ado, Kathy, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm going to be off screen as well, and we're going to put your presentation up and when you tell us to. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so very much for having me. I'm very pleased to be here, and I'm ready to roll.
So with that, Robert is going to share the screen and have the presentation come up.
That's wonderful.
So
to scroll to the top, we're close, but
yeah, this looks like it's starting in the middle. So Robert, if you could
scroll up. I will.
There we go. Thank you, Robert. So tonight I am going to be talking about how to create a native garden, or a pollinator corridor, a longer area if you had such a space. You can next. So where should I begin? You can see these beautiful little crocuses. You can see on the swamp milkweed, a monarch that we attracted. And next slide, please. I think we need to start with the philosophy about gardening. Actually, we should, like doctors do, take a Hippocratic oath, a garden oath, to do no harm and actually to do well by nature or to restore nature. Next slide, please. So I think what really precipitated my interest in trying to address the problems that we're facing regarding the loss of insect species. There was a big UN report in 2019 that said 1 million species face extinction. And actually humans will also suffer as a result because we're part of this whole system. Next. And the threat of extinction is greatest to these insect species, these groups of families of insects. The top one being the butterflies and moths, the Lepidoptera, and the next one, bees, wasps, ants, and sawflies, and then the dung beetles. And don't forget the dung beetles. They're very important for sequestering E. coli that shows up in our gardens and in our cities, and they help put it away way deep down where it won't do any harm. So we've got to not forget the dung beetles. Next slide. So what are some of the causes of the declines of the insect species? First, it's due to habitat loss. Big problem has been due to the intensive agriculture that we've been doing and the land that's necessary for that. But there's other issues that have also been affecting the insect decline. Chemical pollutants, invasive species, climate change, and many other factors. Next, please. So first, who are pollinators and why are they so important? I think many of you will know that the pollinators include everything from bats and bees, birds, butterflies, beetles, other small animals. Obviously the bees are the most important. The native little honeybees are super important. But these pollinators help sustain our ecosystems, which is incredibly important to all these little critters, but also us. They also produce natural resources by helping plants reproduce. Next slide. They are essential for our food and for our economy. There are more than 200,000 species of pollinators, and our agriculture needs them. 1 out of 3 bites we take exists because we have pollinators. And if you're fond of fruits and berries, they are really essential. The annual value that's placed on pollinators in the United States is $34 billion a year. So that's pretty incredible. And in this picture here, we have a little bee, and anyway, that's fine. We can see more of them here. They need us and we need them. Here's a swallowtail, another sphinx caterpillar, and on the coneflowers, another little bumblebee. Next slide, please. So this is the best book if you want to read one book. I mean, I became a master gardener in 2019, and then I've read this book, and this has been really what I go to with all of the recommendations that he's made. And I will share those with you now, but it's an excellent read. I'll just say that Doug Tallamay is an entomologist from the University of Delaware, and he and his colleagues have done an awful lot of research that we now are the benefits of, because he understands where we need to go, and it's all of us have to get involved. Next slide, please. So he starts out by describing the problem is that 85% of the land east of Mississippi River is private. So if we want to make a difference to address the decline of insects and to promote the pollinators, we're going to have to address what's the predominant landscape, and that is grass. So turf grass needs to help move out of the way for our native plant community. And just to give you an idea, he did a study, and in Maryland, there are 1.1 million acres of lawn, and more lawn than the combined area of all state parks, of forests and wildlife preserves. So that's, all these places where we think of when we want to go to nature and natural places and beauty. It's not enough to help sustain our decline of insects, just because we have many more lawns when you piece them all together. Next slide. And what's wrong with lawns? Well, first, 30% of all water used on the East Coast is for watering our summer lawns. Or watering our lawns in summer. 40% of the chemicals that are used in the United States on lawns are banned in other countries because of their health hazards. And about 50%, somewhere between 40 and 60% of all lawn fertilizers end up in our drinking water, which is not a good thing. And another interesting fact was that homeowners put about the same amount of fertilizers on lawns as is used in agriculture. So I don't think we've ever thought of ourselves as big agriculture, but that's where the numbers fall. Next slide. So why caterpillars? This is probably the one takeaway message from Doug Talamay's book. It's that 96% of all bird species feed their young caterpillars. Not like the song about, the early bird catches the worm. Robins do feed their young worms, but they're one of the few species that does. All the rest rely on caterpillars that are the early stage for moths or butterflies. But why do parent birds go to the caterpillar? Well, there's two really good reasons. One, it's extremely easy to feed a baby bird. You can see the little baby beaks open, and you can put in this squashy little caterpillar very easily. That's very soft, so we don't hurt their little mouths. It's super high in protein and fat, which are the calories that they need to feed these little guys. And mom and dad birds, based on the species of birds, have to make hundreds of trips daily to feed their young in the nest. So this is the prize. This is why we need to keep leaves on the ground, the leaf litter, where it's the home to the resting, wintering over little caterpillars. Next page. So another takeaway term that I hope you'll remember is the importance of what Talamay calls keystone plants and trees. It's not just about biodiversity, just planting a whole bunch of a variety of things. That's important, but we need to be even more strategic. Based on his research and research with his colleagues, he found throughout the United States, get this, 5% of native or local plants host 3/4 of all the Lepidoptera, or the moths and butterflies. I'll say that again, 5% of the plants host 3/4. So that 5% are pretty important plants, and I'll tell you more. Next page. So the mid-Atlantic keystone plants, because different parts of the United States have different native plants that support or host their local pollinators. The mighty oak, though, in the lower 48 states is number one, numero uno. And look, it hosts 557 different species of moths and butterflies. That's amazing. That really is. I don't have the numbers for asters or goldenrods or sunflowers, but they're also at the top of the list. And there's many different varieties of asters. There's different types of sunflowers, but always the easiest thing to remember with keystone is that it's got to be a native plant. The critters that came here thousands and thousands of years were connected to those plants, and even things that came over hundreds of years with the Europeans do not have local pollinators that go to them. Next page. Talamay and his colleagues again did a study that showed that where he compared properties that had native plants on them to ones that didn't have native ones on them. And he found that bird species were 8 times more abundant and significantly more diverse, more types, when he looked at the native properties compared to the non-native. And you can see this is actually the building where I live, and there's 2 blue jays there that I just caught the other day. Next slide. He also found in that study that there were significantly more caterpillars and caterpillar species on the native lands, where native plants were planted, I should say, and significantly greater bird species, abundance, diversity, and richness. That's another important factor that is the science basis for why we care about keystone plants. Next slide. So now I wanted to give you the first step, 6 steps, easy steps to plan either a native garden at your home or a corridor in your neighborhood. So we'll go through each one of these steps one at a time, but I just wanted to do the overview here. We have to select a site. We have to remove invasive plants, and we have to be informed, of the best time to do that, it's the best time of the year, so we don't spread more seeds for sure. To remove grass and add, or turf grass and add soil, always avoiding chemicals, and planting a tree if we can, if there's room and wherever we're planting. And then of course, going on to plant native plants. So the next slide, please. So here's selecting a site. The corridor with Van Ness Main Street runs from Van Ness Street all the way up to Nebraska. This was one of the later areas that we developed, but this is before we did anything, just to show you the shape it was in. Not a lot of interest, not a lot of movement of butterflies or bees or birds. And you can see the site on the right, you know, it has gravel mixed in. Again, even this narrow little area could make a difference if we planted native plants. Next slide. We even did a temporary little garden when we lost a huge heritage tree that became very sick. This is right near Calvert Woodley, if you remember that big tree that was there in this little triangle. The city is still planning to address stormwater issues, and this whole thing's going to be converted. So I said, since this was, I think, back in 2019, let's just put something in temporarily just to make it look beautiful. Everybody was missing the tree. And it is something that kind of changes the neighborhood and makes it much more beautiful, and definitely is helpful for the pollinators and all of us who care about sustainability of food in the future. So we planted a bunch of wildflowers, and this is a colleague of mine who's a veterinarian who loves gardening, who just recently moved to Vermont, but Elizabeth was a great help here. Next slide, please. Removing the invasive species. This is what I do weekly with Hillwood. I do it occasionally with Tregarin, another place I volunteer. But this is really important that we remove these invasive species for a number of reasons that I'll explain. First, they have a devastating impact on native species. They crowd them out, and they even cause some to go away. Native species, these invasive species lack predators. They don't have anyone pushing them out of the way, except for humans, I guess, when we're trying to remove them. They outcompete native plants for food, water, and space. And here's a picture of something called heavenly bamboo, or Nandina. And it was the plant of the year, I heard, in DC in 1960. And so if you go around the neighborhood, I bet you'll see this stuff. But the problem is those little berries there contain cyanide. And there have been peer-reviewed studies that have been conducted on cedar waxwings, that when they're hungry, they will go for these birds, as will other little mammals. And we've seen recently a photo of squirrels eating these things too, but they're very poisonous, and we shouldn't have them in our garden. Next slide. Other invasive plants include ivy. Ivy is also a threat to trees, so we have to remove this in a very good way. And I'm going to become a weed warrior with the Rock Creek Conservancy in May too, just getting more training on how to effectively and safely remove these invasives. But these plants produce abundantly, easily. They disperse their seeds. They're super resilient. They produce by roots, stems, and seeds. They also release chemicals in their root system that kills nearby natives. So they kind of take over the whole place. The other thing about natives is, I keep saying natives, invasives, is that they also start earlier than almost all of our native plants. So they get the early start, they take off, and they put their placemat down or whatever, and they really make it hard for anything else to grow there where they are. Next slide. And the health and the cost of invasive plants is tremendous from a health standpoint. The allergies due to the invasive plants pollen are much more severe for people who have respiratory conditions or who have allergies. I, for one, have allergies, so I know that the invasive plants are a problem to me when I'm trying to get rid of them. It costs our country, it's estimated at 120 billion each year. And that has to do with the cost of having these things removed, and also the opportunity cost of pushing out the native plants. And also then obviously the pollinators, and then that affects our food supply too. Next slide. So now I'm going on to the third way to get going in a garden. So removing grass, it's really the useless dead zone. It doesn't sequester carbon. It doesn't support any local pollinators. And you can see again, this is further down, closer to muchas grasses, where there's at least some green grass later in the year, but this is what we did. We removed the grass, and it has very shallow roots, so it's pretty easy to do, and you just need a little bit of a shovel and a little bit of strength to remove it, and you can do a little bit at a time. We just did like 2 little square squares from the sidewalk each weekend where we made progress to do the whole thing. Next slide. Then we need to add soil. So that's really all we do. We remove grass, rocks, and if there's other trash that you wouldn't believe what's underneath there. It's a lot of construction trash, in some cases, big rocks, metals. I even found a saber in front of Gold's gym that was buried there for who knows how long. And we have to rejuvenate the soil so we can plant wonderful plants, native plants. You need to add about 4 to 6 inches. And I'm not doing a promo, but I'll just say Leaf Grow, which is very inexpensive, is made in Maryland, and it's made completely of just composted leaves and grass. So it's just compost. So you're kind of recycling a product that's already there, but you can also just leave the leaves. But when you're getting started, you probably have to do this step. You really have to add some good soil. Next. You need to avoid chemicals. And the reason is that pesticides kill pests, and also they harm or kill beneficial insects or pollinators. The pesticides, which go by many different names, pesticides is the general category, but there's herbicides, insecticides, fungicides, and so forth. They all don't stay where we put them, and they're not targeting just whatever we're trying to get rid of. It's kind of a big foul swoop that damages everything nearby. And also you should know that even fertilizers that sound like they're a good thing, they often contain herbicides too. So that's really important to remember to avoid even using fertilizers. Next slide. All right, so here's some natural alternatives that you can do in your own yard or garden or pollinator corridor, is that plants can repel mosquitoes too. If you've got a problem with mosquitoes, this sign was actually in front of Spolina saying that they had sprayed for mosquitoes, but if they had planted marigolds, rosemary, lavender, citronella, basil, allium, mint, sage, bee balm, lemongrass, they would have probably kept them away. There's also mosquito dunks. If there's a place where you can put water out and actually kill all the larvae and eliminate them, but that's another talk. Rodents also don't like marigolds, rosemary, or lavender. So if you have a mouse problem or a squirrel problem, plant some marigolds or rosemary because those little guys will stay away. Next slide. The other thing you can do, Doug Talamay says, is plant a tree. If you have room, you can plant a tree. And in DC, we have this effort to try to create a tree canopy. So Casey Trees is working with, I think it's DDOT actually, not DOEE, but you can request a tree and they will plant that in the public space with the city for free. Or you can contact for your private property, Casey Trees, and they will plant as many trees as you want. They have a huge selection of what they can plant, and you just have to get in the queue. The best time of year, of course, to plant is either spring or fall, but even best is fall. And here's a little tree I planted in memory of my mother about 7 years ago when she passed away. I got a little permit for $50, bought this tree and had it planted there. But you can do it for free. So that's an important fact and very helpful for the pollinators. Next slide. And finally, the last step is to plant natives, never invasive. So again, sunflowers, goldenrod, and milkweed are critical for pollinators. Milkweed is specifically for the monarchs that are in great threat, and they do pass through our area on their way to Mexico, the OML fir forest. So if you got to have milkweed to have monarchs land on your property. Next one. There's more. These are natives that are in the spring this time of year. I've got phlox that's purple in the background there. The pink one in the middle of the bleeding hearts, and the celandine poppy is a woodland shade. These are plants that like the shade too. So there are different kinds of. They don't have to all be in the sun. And there's tons of different kinds of sunflowers too, and they're okay. Just remember, the only thing you need to remember is native plants when you're working on trying to attract pollinators. Next slide. And of course, the ecosystem for birds. I mean, there's the Audubon is involved in the same plant finder effort as well, and I'll talk about that too. But there's over 300 bird species in DC, and you can go to Audubon website with a plant finder if you really want to, for example, track a mockingbird. I think this is a mockingbird. So there are certain kinds of plants and bushes and trees that they favor, and hummingbirds we all love too, and they're plants that they will tell you kind of bring them in. Next slide. Here's our goldenrod. And just to give you an idea, this is like a page right from the National Wildlife Federation, and probably also related to the Audubon one too. But the goldenrod plant hosts 18 different species of birds, from mockingbirds to wrens, to this little warbler. That's a little image of him, but goldenrod is often confused with ragweed. Don't confuse it. This does not cause allergies. It's a beautiful plant. It's hardy. It can deal with our droughts. All native plants do better dealing with the drought or the floods that we have in the DC area because they've adapted to this area. This plant also hosts native honeybees, so it's really a very important pollinator for us. And it's a keystone plant. Next one. So again, this is right off a picture, a screen from the National Wildlife Federation for my zip code 2000 888. It's as you can see, the top one started with this is for plants, not for trees. The goldenrod, 63 different types of butterflies and moths. The next one is strawberries. Ground strawberries, a great ground cover, which I use where I plant right around where I live. And then you can say helianthus, the sunflower, at 43 different types. These are very strong when you're in the double-digit numbers, but even down to the lupin, as you can see, the last one in the bottom corner, or just trust me, that's what it says. There are 23 different types of species that they attract, and they're gorgeous. And what's important too is some of these flowers show up in the fall and the summer, and some are in the spring. And so having a mix of these, and I'll again talk about the season, you have to plan for a season of color that can be done very easily. And the honeybees and the bees will thank you. Next one. So again, you need to plant seeds, plant seedlings for all different seasons. We live in hardiness zone 7A, that's for Chevy Chase, Maryland, as well as for DC. You probably know all the little spring ephemerals we planted back in the fall, or at some point in the fall, because daffodils come back every year. Tulips are there for 2 or 3 years. And then this time of year, we're now planting for the plants that will emerge this summer and fall. So again, look at all the different layers of plants, vines, bulbs, herbs, ground cover. We want all of this in the garden. Next slide. We definitely want to encourage the next generation of pollinators, and that means literally the next one. And that's why those leaves are important, and why it's important to plant at least 70% of your plants to be native ones. That ensures a replacement population. And again, this is based on research that was done by Doug Talame. So you can still have 30% of things that are not native that you like, that are really ornamental and beautiful. I love my spring tulip and daffodils and crocuses and little lilac bush, but and I like camellias. All of those aren't native. They're fine to be there, just so it's not your whole monoculture and that you have native plants. Here I've got bluebells in this picture. This is a monarch caterpillar that is on milkweed, and then I think that's an azalea with a little bee there. Next slide, please. So again, I keep telling you, remembering here the types of common plants, bulbs that we plant at different times of year. The perennials, most perennial plants that we plant are best planted in the fall. That's also the best time to plant trees too, but the spring isn't bad either. It's just usually it's harder to get started when you've got the hot summer ahead of you, as opposed to being able to winter over. Okay, next slide, please. So now I'm going to go into some spreadsheets, and I am sharing with you guys ones that I have done and pulled together from some very good trusted resources. And I'll go through all these different types and show you without going on a spreadsheet, but I'll have screens sort of saved from to go through one by one of these items. The source for most of this information is the Missouri Botanical Gardens, which is a trusted source for gardeners. And if you go to the next slide, we'll get started. So first, I told you one of the things we need to do is select a tree. So I have just a few examples. I have a picture of a cherry tree, a native one. But again, the mighty oak, it attracts over, as you can see in the far right column, it attracts over 500 different species. I don't have numbers for the other ones because a lot of the databases just say what it attracts as opposed to how many species. But the redbud, which I planted for my mother, attracts hummingbirds too. One of, other birds as well, but that was kind of cool. And you can see that the dogwood is excellent for both birds and butterflies. Next slide. So you'll also want to think about tall and short. You'll want to have ground cover that's as short as pussy toes that are adorable, and mountain mint, or the cardinal flower from lobelia is the Latin or the scientific name used. But there's also the Joe Pye weed that you may not have heard of. And I'll just mention that a lot of words that have weed or names that have weeds are actually really good native plants, even though they seem to be the wrong name. And I know there's even a movement of trying to change the names of plants because they're unappealing. But milkweed, common milkweed or swamp milkweed are beautiful plants, and they do bring the butterflies. Joe Pye weed does too. And you can see, anyway, the height goes from a half a foot all the way up to 7 feet. And these tall from seed sunflowers are very attractive too, that we're right in front of politics and prose. Next slide. You can look at the light care. If you've got a shady garden or a bright garden, there's plants that will grow in your place. You just have to choose the right plant for the right place. So you've got blue false indigo for part shade, or bee balm that's wonderful and a very hardy plant that's great for pollinators. And then if you've got full sun, you might want penstemon or the asters or another keystone plant. So there's lots of choices. I love hyssop, Anna's hyssop. It's really wonderful. And you can see, of course, my goldenrod there too. And this is Gucci, a little orb spider that came into my garden, and I took a picture of her. She lived there one summer a couple years ago. And do you know that these guys take down their beautiful silk web every day and create a new one every day? I used to think she was gone, and then it was just that I had gotten up early and she hadn't put hers up yet or something. But very cool to see this orb spider. That was kind of good luck to have her. I'm hoping I get another one back someday. Next slide. Color, obviously, some of us prefer yellows or pinks or oranges or whites, but we can look at color. And again, remember on the next slide that the leaf texture is going to be more important because the leaves and the plant will be out there longer than the blooms will be. This is Monarda on the left-hand bee balm, but it's beautiful leaves. The flower is really cool, but it's only there a couple months. And again, this is once we planted by Muchas Gracias near Politics and Prose, that whole area, this long corridor, once plants were in there. And again, you can see chrysanthemums are not mums that we all see, those are not native. But then we've got sunflowers, and we've got some goldenrod, and I know we've got asters in that garden there too. Next slide, please. Okay, so here's some other items I wanted to talk about. They're kind of not random, but they're important things to think about for your garden or for a corridor. Water source, design plan, thinking in layers and seasons, leaving no room for weeds, the leaves again, signage and cleaning up after what, and partners. So the next slide, I'll start talking about water source. Fortunately, this is my husband here by one of the restaurants, La Liguras. They had an outdoor source, so we could bring a hose and attach it to the outlet and easily water the area. By the Streetery, this is by I'm Americano and Rosemary Bistro. We have kid power, adult power, watering the plants by wonderful waiters that helped fill up big containers that we would then fill into these watering cans and water a very small area with this big oak tree that's right there by that streetery. Next slide. Planning, you want to plan out, and the spreadsheets I think I provided you with, you can help choose plans. But it's also cool once you've decided what you're going to plant to lay it out and see if it makes sense and looks nice together. And this is where you can maybe see the colors and the texture of the leaves and the height of the plants, and you definitely want to plant close together, planting densely. Next one. The seasonal bloom, or I would say that bee nectar and pollen. Actually, there's some bees that only go after nectar and some go after pollen and some go after both. But you can see the green shades of what flowers bloom from April through June, what plants are around in the summer and which ones are there at the end of the year, October through December or the first frost. So I could say, one idea for anybody would be choose 3 in the green area. Maybe it's columbine, flax, and baptista. And then choose 3 in the pink zone. Maybe it's coreopsis, yarrow, and the cardinal flower. Or I should say maybe, yeah, that's fine. And then as you can see, there weren't as many options as we get later in the season for the ones that I chose this year. I chose one annual, the zinnias that are out for a very long time, and they're very easy to sow. But black-eyed Susans and cardinal flowers, but there's more that are at that end of the year too. Okay, next one. Now the seasonal blooms. You can again see this is, if you think of winter, it always seems so dreary, but if you have a red twig dogwood, which is this one on the far left of the page, it's gorgeous. There's also a yellow twig dogwood, there's winterberry, so there's beautiful shrubs that have winter interest. There's also like the Virginia creeper that has fall interest with gorgeous leaves, and it's a big vine that can go up a tree very high or a pole. There's snowdrops when there's just leaves still out, and ferns, whatever. But you can have things that are making the garden interesting throughout the year. And this bottom photo on the right is where my friend, who's 97 years old now, let me convert his entire lawn into a native garden. And I planted it before COVID, or I guess when COVID started. So he's had something interesting to look at through these couple trying years. Next slide. Leave the leaves. This is another very important message. If this is the one thing you remember, it's winter habitat for the caterpillars, the spiders, and other beneficial insects. It's free and it's natural fertilizer, no chemicals. And it's really critical because there's a whole generation of bugs that have wintered over. Their life cycle may have only been a month, but now they were the chosen ones to sit in the leaf litter. They're microscopic, but they're going to be there until it gets really warm enough for them to come out, crawl out. And they are the food for those 96% of all bird species rely on those little caterpillars. So if you want to hear the birds, you don't want a silent spring, as Rachel Carson would say. You definitely want to leave the leaves and let the nature take its ways to fertilize your garden. Next slide. And I also mentioned that the last freeze is April 15th. I've seen April 19th as the average one. Last year, I know we had a below freezing date of the first weekend in May. So, we're not out of the woods yet, but I've reduced the level of leaves, the layers of leaves, to just leave a little bit now. I'm starting to slowly by hand remove the leaves. I don't use a leaf blower, and I recommend that others don't. They basically skip using the leaf blowers. And there's a couple reasons why, or very good reasons. They generate an incredible amount of noise, as you probably know, but they also generate dust and air pollutants. And this dust contains potentially dangerous things that are very unhealthy for us. There's often pesticides in it, mildew, animal fecal matter. It's just stuff you don't want to be breathing. And that's not just for the workers, it's for all of us that are anywhere near where they've been blowing. It causes irritation, allergies, and disease from generating this big dust bowl. And it also compacts the soil and increases water runoff. So why would you do that to your garden when it's like working against what you're trying to do? Okay, that's my spiel on leaf blowers. I believe that signs help educate folks on things. And this sign that I put right near the sunflowers was that please leave the sunflower heads on the stalk. Don't collect your seeds here because it's really winter food for the birds. So if you take away all the heads, there's no food for those guys because that's what they would go to in the winter here. Next slide. It's another sign. And encourage cleanup after dogs too. The US EPA has said or declared that dog poop is actually a pollutant, and it's very harmful with the nutrients and bacteria that gets into our waterways. If you go to the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, it's the main source of pollution in the Chesapeake Bay that's harming all the little critters that we love to eat out of the bay. It's causing algal blooms because dog urine is packed with nitrogen and phosphorus, and that's what we have too much of, that actually, it really harms our waterways and all the little critters that live there. Next slide. And if they can't even give you a bigger picture, DC dogs produce 44 million pounds of waste each year, and that's roughly the weight of 3 Capitol domes. So Forest Hills Connection created these signs. Don't pollute, scoop the poop. And this is all to protect our streams and waterways, because this stuff all goes into our groundwater and drinking water too. So it's not nice to leave it there. Next thing. Next slide. Yep. DOEE has a website too. So I recommend that you find partners. Van Ness Main Street, Forest Hills Connection. These are some of the folks that we worked with, but we've also worked with schools and students, environmental groups, faith-based groups, master gardeners, and just neighbors. And next slide will say, and they're of all ages. Well, we value our partners because we help get our volunteers working with local businesses. We actually are also building community, and they helped us choose places to plant as well. And they help to economically too. So they're good partners. And then I was going to show the next slide that I think says it's all ages and abilities that we welcome, and have had people from very young of 2.5 with their parents up to, people in their 80s that have helped out with our planting, because it's not rocket science. It's easily something done that we can show you and have a good time doing it. Next slide. And lots of master gardeners helped out at one point, and even children of master gardeners or grandchildren of master gardeners. Here we are. Next slide. And I just wanted to pass on, we can do it. We can make it happen. And here's Mary Che, who's been very supportive of the pesticide-free zone efforts, that her work as a councilwoman. And now I am ready for the last slide, which just says questions. I'm happy to take questions. And all these links are now going to be on the handout, so we can leave the screen right now, because we'll have that in a handout with all the critical places. But I'll say I've given you links to places where you can buy native plants, where you can order seeds online, like the Prairie Moon Nursery. And then there's places you can drive to that are as close as, Alexandria or Upper Marlboro, or again, ordering online. And I think that that's one of the things you guys will probably know is where you can get these plants. Great. So we can go ahead to questions.
Fantastic. Well, we've got a number of questions in the chat. Okay. Thank you. First of all, thank you so much. It was so informative. I've got pages of notes that I'm looking forward to digesting and finding certain plants and to put in my garden. So thanks so much for all the questions that are in the chat. I want to note that there were a number of people who commented about mosquito spraying and how it's counterproductive.
Yes, it sure is.
Someone saying it should be illegal. It's a scam.
Yeah.
It kills the good stuff and the bad stuff.
That's the whole thing. That's the whole problem. I mean, Rachel Carson, she'd be rolling over in her grave that we're still tackling these issues and still have these issues. Mm-hmm. I mean, aren't we smart enough yet? I mean, are we trying to eliminate ourselves? Sorry.
Exactly. No, and I think there's definitely a choir of people adding to that. An interesting question about composted grass. Mm-hmm. Someone noted that it sounds like it could be full of chemicals. How do we make sure we aren't adding chemicals by using leaf grow?
That's a really good, leaf grow, I think, I can tell you that they don't add anything to leaf grow. They don't add any extra chemicals, because a lot of the soil that you buy. It's always hard to be 100% pristine unless you do everything yourself. And I don't have a place to compost my own things. Like another big no-no is to compost invasives. The last thing you want to do is spread more seeds. So those things should be put into a horrible black trash can and put away with the trash. It should not be mixed in your compost. So most of the places where I volunteer, they know to do that. But if you didn't know to do that, you could be creating a bigger mess. I don't know specifically about the grass company cuttings, but I think that's a very good point. And I do not mulch every year. I only put down that soil once, and it goes from there by just the leaves staying there. So it's just a one-time thing. And that's mostly because I've worked in these tree boxes that really lack soil, and what's there is just terrible shape, or even rocks and trash. There's almost not even good soil at all. Go ahead.
Another good question. Do you have a good list of plants that rabbits won't eat? We have a lot of rabbits here in this area.
Yeah, no, I know. I have them, I know, in my friend's garden, and I've seen a little one out here. There definitely are plants. I could definitely do an extra little research and send that as a list to you guys. But what I do is I go to, trusted sites. I even just Google Scholar can even tell you, it's funny. Nature has created things that a lot of plants that deer and rabbits don't like are native plants. So, you can easily find things that the answer is yes, that they won't eat them. You probably have the list of all the things they do eat from your experience, but I can definitely do a quick search and see what I can find of rabbits will leave this alone. That's a good question.
And deer resistant.
And deer resistant too.
We do see the deer on the side of Connecticut.
Hosta's like a candy for kids in a candy store. So Hosta will bring the deer out. If you're near deer property, area where deer come into your property, definitely don't put Hosta there unless you want to draw them into that corner of your yard or something.
So another question, are all nandinas a problem in the garden?
Yeah, and I can tell you, here's the halfway measure to address nandina. Cut off the berries if you don't want to remove the plant, but I know you probably put it there for the berries. But I actually had a slide, and but I didn't want to talk too long because I wanted to get to the questions. I would recommend replacing nandina with, and I have recommended this to other people in the neighborhood that they've asked for what should I replace it with? I want something that looks like that. Winterberries, the easiest answer. It's got beautiful red berries. You need a male and a female, but you can have, like, let's say you have 5 nandina plants. You can have 4 females and just 1 male nearby. That will help with the cross-pollination for that to survive. But winterberry is beautiful, and it's very attractive to pollinators. So it's a gorgeous shrub in the winter because it's got those bright red berries that we like.
Love that. Love that. Can I ask you one of my questions?
Sure.
Ticks. So you're outdoors all for long periods of time. What are your strategies, and have you been seeing ticks out already? We haven't heard too much about it since COVID, because they really want to encourage people to get outside.
Yeah. Ticks,
still there.
They're near, and I know that if you go into wooded areas and where deer are present, and my uncle has Lyme's disease and he lives in upper northern Wisconsin. They're there. I always I wear good equipment. I have gloves that I wash. I have, good shoes that I keep outside, and then I have clothes that I immediately wash, and I take a shower when I come in to make sure that I'm clean. And then that's also important for the tools that you use. Always clean them. You can get, rubbing alcohol, or you can even just get wipes, but always clean your tools just to make sure that you're not, unbeknownst to you, have had your trowel in a place where there had been, some horrible, garlic mustard or something that is now going to be spread all over every time you dip your little tool somewhere else. So you've got to practice clean hygiene, and that goes for your tools as well as yourself as a way to prevent stuff. I got a whole bunch of those oak mite bites when I was working in Tregarin, because they had a wooded area, and I had those bites, and I got the by all over my body. And I got my dermatologist to give me the little cream that made it better. So then it was bad for a few weeks. And then I just avoided going into the areas where the, cicadas were like this thick, like a 2 feet dead cicadas of the 17-year cicadas. We don't have to worry about that for 17 years. But that was, I think, what really brought out the oat and white. So yeah. And I always wear sunscreen and hats and always, I even give the children that help out on our community gardening and adults gloves. I just say, please put the gloves on. I don't know what's here. And I don't want people to cut their fingers on little shards of grass or touch dog poop. The whole thing is, there's a lot of stuff that we didn't put there that we don't think should be in a garden, but it's there. And we always Heidi and me to try to make sure that the next person walking by doesn't do the same thing, dropping. I pick up cigarette butts all the time, and I pick up dog poop, but I always get rid of it properly and so forth.
That's great. So one person was asking, a number of people are saying that they have very shaded areas. Are there any pollinators that you would suggest for shaded areas?
I definitely have them on my list that shows the shade. And I can, off the top of my head, I can say Jacob's ladder. I can talk about native columbine. There's the really pretty ones that aren't native that are from Colorado, but for our area, there's the shorter ones, but they're still really beautiful reds and blues and yellows. We also have, let me think, other off the top of my head. Well, I think the Baptista takes shade, but even when I was running through my slides, there definitely are. And I can, if people have really heavy shade, I can do a whole nother list just for shade gardens. And there are definitely many to choose from. And partial shade, probably a lot of plants. Full shade becomes a different thing, but hellebores are native and they grow in the shade too. But Jacob's ladder are gorgeous. Trillium is another wildflower that's beautiful. And it's, again, a spring ephemeral, but there are definitely beautiful plants as well as ferns that do very well in shaded areas, like the Christmas fern. That's a native fern. Again, go for the native ferns because they have exotic ones too. If they say Korean or Chinese or a European name, those are not natives. And if you go to, like, I shop, I'll just say a lot at American Plant, and they have their natives in a separate area. You just can go to that table. And if you're not sure and they put some other plants just to make it look pretty, I say, that's not a native, right? I'll say, right. But we just made this. I said, okay, fine. Just wanted to be sure. Because I said, I don't think that's a native. But you can look at all the stuff up, and that Missouri Botanical Garden is that source that has tons of information that I put into the spreadsheet, that when you have a chance to look at that. And I'll just say, if anyone has questions and stuff, I can either give my email or they can go to you, Shelley, and I'm happy to try to answer individual questions too for issues.
Great. I love this question that we got. Someone was wondering if you could speak to how the neighbors reacted to the natural treatment of the landscape as opposed to sort of it being very tidy. Was there any resistance? Were there people who were like,
you're never going to please 100% of the people 100% of the time. I'll just say that. I don't know if that was a politician who said it, but there always are, I'll just say that all of the people who are, what they even called it, it's the new perennial movement in gardening. And I even was on a presentation, I'll just back up a second, recently during COVID. I'm on all these Zoom webinars for people, and there was a Obrick garden out of Madison, Wisconsin, where I grew up, that had, what was the old way we gardened? They used to spray DDT on people who went to war. They sprayed it on everything. It's a carcinogen. It's horrible. Again, Rachel Carson wrote the wonderful book, Silent Spring, and many other wonderful books by observing what had happened using these chemicals. And we're learning, glyphosate is finally going to be eradicated from the weaponry of trying to attack whatever, because it is a carcinogen. It's a likely carcinogen. IARC has already said it. But we just don't need the chemicals. And we really, there was in the master propagation class for natives, and of course, we have a farmer and a guy who's worked for a landscape company for 15 years. And even when we were trying to propagate, from cuttings, berries or plants or whatever, he said, here's the stuff, here's the chemical stuff, but I don't use it. It doesn't seem to do anything better than just, he makes a willow tea out of willow branches, and that is the stimulant for helping to grow the new roots. So, I mean, you really don't need the chemicals. And again, like fertilizer, everyone thinks you have to fertilize. And actually, there's so much potassium and nitrogen in our lawns and in our yards and on our plants already. The last thing we need is more of it. And of course, the Chesapeake Bay, you know, all of our water supply doesn't need it either. So anyway.
And Kathy, doesn't the University of the District of Columbia, don't they offer a service where they'll come test your soil?
There is definitely, yeah, and before they got that in place, because I think it might have just started getting going during COVID. So I use Delaware's, but a lot of the extension services do that. But I think it was $15 or something like that. But definitely, I think you can have your soil tested. And I know because we live near Connecticut Avenue and so forth, we'll have lead. And if that's super important if you're growing vegetables, you need to be in raised beds. That's maybe to keep away the dogs and critters, and maybe with netting to keep away the rabbits and deer too. But definitely, if you've been near some site where they used to manufacture batteries, you know, the lead in the soils are going to be really detrimental to your eating the vegetables there. So yes, for sure, testing your soils is a very good thing. And we had our soil tested around here too. Yeah.
Let's do one more. So there's a new Maryland law on invasive plants coming through the legislature right now. Oh, and this is a comment. DC is putting together a rule on invasive plants as well, which I think is great.
Wonderful.
You know, and I think one of the things that you noted, which is so important, is education. We need to educate ourselves.
Yeah, I don't think any one of us wants to plant an invasive or had any clue. You know, I didn't know Nandina were a problem until I learned they were a problem. And I was working at Peabody School in Capitol Hill, and we were removing them because there were children there and we didn't want to be killing the birds. I mean, and it was and it was a master naturalist that the master gardener was married to. And I was like, wow, Nandina's a problem. We got to get rid of all of these. That they're all over our property where I live. You know, it's everywhere. And I love that's, you know, and Maryland did have a requirement, I think since 2019, to label Nandina. They still sell it. This is the thing that kills me. They still sell ivy. I don't know if they sell kudzu or garlic mustard, but they sell these things that
it's crazy.
What we're fighting to get rid of. Vinca, I think, you know, there's some explanation. You know, the things that grow really fast are invasives, and there can be aggressive native plants. Okay, I mean, I can give a lot of my black-eyed Susans. They replicate really fast. You can divide and give to your friends because they'll outgrow the space that you put them in. And daffodils spread like crazy too, but in a nice way and at a nice time of year when there's nothing else out there. So that's okay. But I think it's important. I think it's so important. I do have on my list of web links to go to that DOEE has a list of plants. I think it's related to pollinators that are invasive and not, but there definitely are other lists that I've got from, I think, other organizations that have those lists, but it's different in every place. It's usually done at a state level. And of course, DC is not a state, so we don't quite have it, but it's so important. I think labeling and letting people know what they're getting into, or just to be aware that this is a really difficult thing to get rid of once you've put it in their ground.
Do you think we can win the war on the invasives taking over Rock Creek Park?
Oh my God. Well, I know I'm now volunteering to be part of the Weed Warrior effort, and I can go into any park once I get certified. But I think, you know, I want to save the trees. So for me, the ivy that's going up the trees, you know, having that, and you snip it like at waist length and about your eye length, and you just cut off the source, because the ivy will just go all the way up. And in winter, it sucks out all the liquid. Then with heavy winds, it can blow them over. So they are tree killers. And you know, that's what I've been doing since I think October at Hillwood, just for a whole area where a bunch of us are tackling every week, just a little bit. We're rolling the stuff down. We're going to make a berm, but we know this is a constant effort. So the best thing you can do is never, ever put it in your yard in the first place. And I have a very dear friend who had a very dear friend from England who put it in his yard, and I'm like pulling it out now, and with permission. But it's a task.
And someone asked, do you have a good tip for getting rid of ivy? They have it spreading into their garden and their yards. from, coming sort of from both sides, from their neighbors?
Well, I would definitely say, this is something you use your clippers if it's not up a tree or something. If it's near your house, it could destroy that too. I mean, I'm doing that for my friend's house as well. But what you want to do, if you have a place where it's not in great public space or whatever, you can put down a black tarp and it can stay there for months and it will cut off all of the light and the plant will die. But it's not a beautiful thing, I'll just say.
Right.
And it may be that you want to do it in certain areas, but otherwise it's just a matter of pulling that stuff out. And I use trowels and I use my pruners, which I clean very well afterwards, because you want to get it, early. You want to get it now, early in the spring. But I know stuff that once it's established, I'll tell you, it's a place that's a great cover for rodents to hang out in. And when I said that, I got the place where I live to finally agree to have it removed because it was on the property where I live too. I'm in a co-op. But before that, they just didn't see any problem. They thought it was cute. I said, well, actually, it's not. And we've got taken over the azaleas right now too. And I'm like, don't you guys like the azaleas? And now that this is a bird killer and a small animal killer, and it could even harm some of your small dogs. I said, don't you think, because we're a dog friendly building, don't you think that's an issue? Don't you think we should get rid of it? So I'm definitely the warpath with invasives, just understanding that to be a promoter of natives, you've got to also be totally for trying to tackle I think we now have land covering the equal to the state of California with invasives in this country, and it's growing at an accelerating rate. So it's like we've got the threat of pollinators going away because they've lost their livelihood with native plants. And we've got, and some things were introduced in this country, like with packaging, they were the plants that came in that way. Other people brought ornamental ones. It was very wonderful to have beautiful exotic plants in your garden. I mean, I love the passion flower, and it's a native plant. It is aggressive. And so it is a high maintenance plant that I have to constantly stake and snip because it just keeps wanting to take over everything. And that's a native plant. But there are some aggressive ones too that you have to tackle. So my choice with native plants is always to choose the low maintenance and the easy that doesn't need a lot of care, and also attracts a lot of species, because that's the keystone, that's the strategy, that's the best bang for your buck, as they say.
Wonderful. Yeah, and somebody mentioned that ivy is also ideal habitat for mosquitoes.
Yeah.
So we're just kind of perpetrating that cycle there.
Got to get rid of rodents and mosquitoes and stopping natives from growing. And it does take stuff over. It really is amazing. So yeah. And I'm, like I said, I'm happy to answer people's individual questions. They can shoot emails to you and then to me or whatever, Shelley, whatever works. I'm happy to try to be helpful. I will do another sheet. I will for people who want shade. I will do a sheet. I can easily pull that together. It might take me a day or two, but I'll do it. Promise it by Monday.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you so much. I mean, I think we could go on for hours and hours. This was really.
Can I do a plug? I'm doing under the talk at politics.
Oh, yeah. Let me ask you. You have a number of upcoming events.
Yep.
You have a number of upcoming lectures. So where will you be? How can people join you? And how can people get more involved? I know that you did the Master Gardeners class, so we're not giving students
right now. So I hope that they start up more classes. But if you happen to live in Maryland, you can probably go to a Montgomery County, class. I'm really pleased that Prince George's County has a person on their sustainability staff that's with the University of Maryland, I should say. But they are starting a pollinator corridor on US 1. So they have got 14 communities that are going to do it down that whole way. And it was because he came to one of our community planting events. So our last community planting event for the spring for now, although I know we'll do more, is this coming weekend. We're going to be at Politics and Prose on Saturday from 1 to 4. And we're going to be at Lala Guris, which is a Nepalese restaurant right near Van Ness and on Connecticut Avenue. So we'll be there on Sunday again from 1 to 4. I know that's Easter and I know Passover's Friday night, but anyway, if anyone's around, I'm always out if anyone wants to just join me gardening. I've got a young girl from Sidwell Friends who's going to work with me for the month of May half time because that's part of her high school graduation stuff. And I've got a little boy after school. I think he's going to be helping me in Thursday after school, and he's 8. And I'm going to be, and actually the Politics and Prose is this. They approach me, and so there's a cost, and you get a discount if you're a Politics and Prose member. But it's from 10 to 11:30 this coming Friday, and on Earth Day, the following Friday, same 10 to 11:30. It'll be hands-on demonstration with, bare roots, bulbs, seedlings, planting in the corridor right there as well. So that will be exciting. Those are, I think, the public ones. I know I'll be doing another lecture for the Master Gardeners and probably the community with UDC. They wanted to have some in-person things in the summer when it's warmer months. But I'm also doing something for the embassy in South Korea just because of Americans who are living there for the Americans abroad. But I'm going to have to learn about Korean native plants. That's the one thing I said, just give you a little time to figure out. It's the same spiel. It was just that they're very different plants. What we would probably find an invasive is probably their native plant that they would want to be planted in their yard. So that's the short list of things right now. And I've written a number of columns with Forest Hills Connection. So if you just search my name, I've talked about, leaf blowers. I've talked about pollinators, and I've talked about, I don't know, many other things that I was either approached to write or whatever. So I do that occasionally. So
wonderful. Well, thank you again so much. I'll get some of these links from you. We're going to follow up with the Chevy Chase Citizens Association. We're going to have a column that we're going to write to follow up and let people know about that they can view this online and provide additional resources to them. So we really appreciate this. This was so wonderful to have you here. Thank you for sharing your expertise in so many different forms, both the hands-on and the verbal, because I think you said it best, is that education and being able to identify all of these species and invasives is so important to creating this natural habitat here in our neighborhood.
Absolutely. And we continue to learn all the time. So I'm still learning, as they say. We continue to learn, which is great.
Lifelong learning. That's the best way to do it.
That's right. Well, thank you so much for this opportunity. I really appreciate it with this very engaged audience. And again, I'm happy to follow up with you, Shelley, any way I can be helpful.
I look forward to it. And hopefully we'll get to garden together at some point.
Yes, for sure.
That would be wonderful.
Great.
Well, thank you. Any other questions from anyone before we leave? I see a lot of thanks.
Oh, that's nice.
I just want to mention, Robert Gordon mentioned that CCCA, the Chevy Chase Citizens Association, is looking for volunteers to help beautify Chevy Chase portion of Connecticut Avenue. So if you want to help the Chevy Chase Citizens Association to do that, please join us. Write president@chevychasecitizens.org if you'd like to help. We've got some great tools and strategies here, so let's start using them and put them in place.
Perfect. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you, Shelley, and thank you, Robert.
Oh, and I'm sorry, Elizabeth. She said I missed her question, and I apologize. There were a lot of things coming in. Let me see. Oh, one more question, if you don't mind. Sure. She said, American Plant sells a lot of invasive plants without disclosing, like butterfly bush.
Yes, that was one of my test questions. If I had an extra chance, would you plant a butterfly weed or butterfly bush? Are you going to go on? I mean, that's one of my pet peeves. I think I have to do, working with another, I won't mention company, where they've planted the wrong things, and now they've let me help give them lists of native plants so they don't do things. But you're right. There's a lot of landscape, I should say a lot of places that sell plants that sell things that they shouldn't be selling. In my opinion, we should not be selling them. They shouldn't be available to buy. Vinca, Pachysandra, these are all invasives that we don't need. Even places where I volunteer, if they're going to plant an invasive, I just don't want to be part of that. Yep. So I would, as customers, I have definitely have asked on more than one occasion, and even friends of mine who are master gardeners who work at different places that have these things being sold, they say, just keep telling them, we don't need to make money this way. And it's, I think, the simple thing that people want to do, the apply mulch everywhere so we never have to water, and put in invasives because it'll take it over in a second, and then nothing else will grow there. Yeah, that's the wrong way to garden.
That's a great way to end.
I agree, Elizabeth.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I'm glad I went up and
No, it's
saw
true.
that question. So thank you, Elizabeth. And yep, and Elizabeth also pointed out that DC needs to remove invasives on their public property as well. There's just tons of them everywhere. So
I think it gets back to that huge cost to remove this stuff, and it's huge time consuming. So we need to get a whole bunch more volunteers involved, like with the Potomac Conservancy for the weed warriors, that project. All of us can become a weed warrior. There's training that's going to happen in May. So, but definitely it's we need a huge people force to make that happen.
it'd be great if there was a patch for Girl Scouts.
Yeah,
they could get for being.
Yeah. And I'm happy to work with Girl Scouts too, Shelley. So if we can get them engaged in place, we could definitely teach them about invasive plants and native plants, and how we can make the world a better place.
Wonderful. Thank you again. Thank you to the audience. Thank you, Robert, as president of Chevy Chase Citizens Association. Appreciate your service and all the work that you do for Chevy Chase. And I hope everyone has a wonderful and productive and fruitful spring planting.
Absolutely. Hear, hear. And happy early Earth Day.
Yes, happy early Earth Day for those who celebrate. I'm sure we all do. Every day is Earth Day.
Yeah.